Hello and welcome back, algebra students. This lesson's on rounding numbers accurate. Rounding is going to be very important in the future. Therefore, making sure we do it properly is very key. Now, before we can talk about rounding, okay, the most important part about rounding is knowing the different place values. Okay, so as we look at this, I have an example up here of a number with all the place values given. Here you have your decimal point. Now, to the right of your decimal point, you have all your partial numbers. Starting with the first one to the right is the tenths place, then the hundredths, thousandths, and 10,000ths. We really normally don't go past hundredths or thousands. Alright? Now, to the left is where we have all our kind of whole numbers. Starting with the ones place, the tenths place, the hundreds, the thousands, 10,000s, 100,000s, and then millions. Okay, so as we look at this, anytime we're rounding, we figure out what place value we're going to round to. Then we look to the right of it, right? We look to the right. So if I was going to round this to the nearest hundreds, I would take the 4. That's the place value I'm rounding to. I look at the number to the right. If it's a 0, a 1, 2, 3, or a 4, what I basically do is I keep this 4 the same. If it's 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9, I add 1 to the 4. So since the number to the right of 2 is less than 5, I would keep this number the same, so I would round it to 0.14. But now, say I was rounding to the nearest thousands. Right? I go to the 2, that's the number in the thousands place, and that's the number that's either going to stay or have 1 added to it. How do I know if I add 1 to it? When I look to the right, that number, if it's 5 or more, I add 1 to it. Since the number to the right of 2 is 7, I'm going to round this to 0.143 because the number is greater than 5, which tells me to add 1 to it. So, let's look at the following exercise. Here it says, round each number to the nearest tens place. Well, what you have to understand is the tens place is all the decimal points are right here. So, if you remember from the place value, okay, it goes ones and then tens. So I know I'm rounding to this digit here. So, when I look at these, 83, to round that to nearest tens. This is my tens place. The number to the right is less than 5. Therefore, I basically round this down to 80. Okay. For 11, okay, I'm rounding to nearest tens place. So I look at the number, it tells me to keep it the same, and that number becomes a 0. So this rounds down to 10. 18. Round to the nearest tens, I know 18 tells me to add 1 to that, and that rounds up to 20. The number to the right of 9 is 3. Therefore, I rounded down to 90. 47. The number to the right of 4 is 7, so it tells me to add 1 to it and turn the 7 to a 0. 49 easily rounds up to, this one tells me to round up, and what does it round up to? 50. 33. Since the number to the right of 3 is 3, it's less than 5, so I round it down to 30. 31. 1 tells me to keep 3 the same, and I round down to 30. 97. Well, I am going to round this up, and the 9 basically becomes a 10, and the 7 becomes a 0, so that rounds up to 100. The number to the right of 3 is 6, so that tells me to round up. I change the 3 to a 4, and the 6 becomes a 0, and that rounds up to 40. Now, when I round these to the nearest 10, right? Remember, once I decide what I'm doing with the number in the tens place, right, I basically round it up or down and change the last number to a 0. So 1 tells me to keep 8 the same. So that rounds down to 980. 943, right? I look at the 3, it tells me to keep 4 the same. So that rounds down to 940. 436, the 6 tells me to round up, so I would round up to 440. 571, the 1 basically tells me to keep 7 the same, and that tells me to round down to 570. The 9 tells me to round the 8 up, so what does that round up to? 890. Alright, the 1 tells me to round down, and when I round down, it becomes 170. Now, here, the 9 tells me to round up, but then when I round this up, it rounds up to 10, so I have to add 1 to the 5, and that rounds up to 600. Number 8, 6 tells me to round up, so a 7 becomes an 8, and that rounds up to 880. 626 will round up to 630. Number 10, 485. The 5 tells me to round up, so that rounds up to 490. Now the nearest tenth here. Okay. Now what number is in the tenths place? If you look, when you have the TH there, right? When you have the TH here, it tells you you're to the right of the decimal. And remember, it goes tenths, then hundredths, then thousands. Okay? So we know this first digit to the right of the decimal is the tenths place. So when we round this to the nearest tenth, 7.17, I get 7 point. 7 tells me to round the 1 up, so we get 7.2. Because it's to the right of the decimal, it really is a pointless place value. So we can basically, you could put 7.20, but that would have the 0 has no relevance. So we would just round to 7.2. The next one, 9 tells me to round the 8 up. So what does that become? 2.9. 3 tells me to round the 2 down. So we go 1.20 or 1.2, sorry. 7.99. 9 tells me to round up. Therefore, that 9 would become a 0 or a 10, so I would add 1 and it would round to 8.0. Or just 8 is fine. 9.97. 7 tells me to round up. Well, when I round the 9 up, it goes to 10, which means I round that 9 up, so I get 10.0. Number 6, 3.81. The 1 tells me to round down, therefore I would round to 3.8. Here, the 2 tells me to round down, so this would round to 9.8. The 8, or the 1 tells me to round the 8 down to 6.8. 4.97, that I would round up. But when I round up, the 9 becomes a 10, which means I add 1 here, so you'd round up to 5.0. Here, the 5 tells me to round the 9 up, 9 tells me to round the 2 up, and once I round up, and that becomes 3.0. Okay, hopefully I'm not going too fast. Now, when I round each number to the nearest hundredth, right, remember, it's tenths and then hundredths. So I'm rounding to this number each and every time. Okay, what number do I look at? I look at the number to the right. So 3 tells me to round up or down. Tells me to round down, so the number stays the same, 5.14. This 7 tells me to round up. So 5.3, the 7 becomes an 8. When I say I round up, I add 1 to the place value I'm rounding to. If I say I'm rounding down, I'm keeping that place value the same. So 6.376, 6 tells me to round up, so it becomes 6.38. 7 tells me to round up, so that 9 becomes a 10, which means a 2 becomes a 3, so it would be 1.30 or 1.3. 2 tells me to round down, so I keep 8 the same, 5.78. Number 6, 2 tells me to keep it the same, or round down, so 2.85. 1 tells me to round down, so 8 stays the same. 1 tells me to round down, so 5 stays the same. 7 tells me to round up, so what do? I round 8.2, 3 becomes a 4 because I'm rounding up. 5 tells me to round up, 7.4, 6 becomes a 7. Alright. Now, I'm still rounding to the nearest hundredth here. Okay? And if I round to the nearest hundredth, I still strictly stay to the number to the right of the hundredths place. So it's tenths, hundredths. So we're still 2 decimal places to the right. But it doesn't matter what happens to the far right. So, right here, I look at the number to the right. 7 tells me to round up. Therefore, I round 1.57. The 3 tells me to round down, so that 5 stays the same. 1 tells me to round down, so the 3 stays the same. 3, does that tell me to round up or down? If it's below 5, we round down. 5.9 stays the same. 5 tells me to round up, so 1.84. 3 tells me to round down, so that 7 will stay the same, 8.77. 7 tells me to round up to 3.45. 7 tells me to round up, so that would become 8.68. Remember, when you round up, you add 1 to the place value you're rounding to. 2 tells me to round down, so that 3 stays the same. 1 tells me to round down, and that would stay 3.27. Go ahead and try the following problems on your own. Make sure you are aware of what you're rounding to. Thank you.